One moment. Or should... I think we're live, Chair Holmes.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Housing and Real Property Subcommittee. Today is February the 26th, and it is 8:37 p.m. This meeting is now called to order. Let me provide with all of us some rules, of which you should have been provided with. This is a meeting of the subcommittee. Guests are always invited to our public meetings. However, I just want to make sure everyone understands that this meeting is a working meeting of the subcommittee. And if we decide we need to call upon others that are here, we will make that announcement to you. Let me give you the order of our meeting and how we're going to proceed today. That will be HB 292 will be heard first, followed by 295, followed by 339, followed by 489. After 489, we'll then go into bills that we need to discuss. And those bills in order of discussion are 93, 222, and HB 705. So that is the order of the bills we're going to be discussing today. Every member of the subcommittee should have received all of the amendments relevant to these bills. So we all should be prepared to discuss what is taking place relevant to the legislation that we're going to be looking at. And as I indicated at the top, the first bill we're going to be looking at is HB 292. And HB 292 is a bill that we have been hearing for the past 8 years in different capacities. And this year's bill has several different amendments to it. And we are attempting to make sure that HB 292 addresses some of the concerns of the recent transactions that have taken place throughout the state. And so Ben is going to go through the amendments for HB 292. And then we're going to have a motion on the amendments. And then we're going to have a discussion period on the amendments of HB 292. Ben, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Chair Holmes. HB 292, we discussed in subcommittee last week. Since then, after getting some feedback and discussing the bill more, Chair Holmes, as you were doing over the week and weekend, there's now some minor updates were made since then. So I'll start with those.
Sure. Widen the screen a little bit, Ben,
Oh, sure.
for us a little bit older than you. There you go. Thank you, sir.
Okay, sweet. Okay, so the first change, none of the changes were particularly substantive or like a large reworking of the bill at all, but there were a few things which we'll go through now. These were, unless specified otherwise, these are going to be for each common ownership community type, condo, HOA, or cooperative housing corporation. But I'm just going to show the condo one because that's just the most straightforward way probably to do this.
And hang on a second there, Ben. I just want to make sure everyone understands that because HB 292 does in fact discuss condos, HOAs, and co-ops, what Ben is going to discuss is just one provision of the bill because the same provision applies to all three. Okay? Thanks, Ben. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So let's see here. On the first update was on page 7 here. And this is, let's see.
I have to be able to hear it. So
Uh-oh, what's going on?
Mr. Chair, point of order.
What's going on here?
Mr. Thomas, mute yourself, please.
Who is
All
that?
non-members should be muted.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Ben.
Okay.
Again, for all those who are on the call and are not members, everyone, please mute yourself. Period. Everyone, please mute yourself. No one can speak until they are called upon by the chair of the committee. Okay? Okay, Ben, please proceed.
Okay, thanks, Chair Holmes. So the first part of the updates that were made, we have here, we're adding a notice requirement about the determination for the financial hardship. Some quick background. One of the big changes for HB 292 is a provision that allows these common ownership communities that are experiencing a financial hardship to make a determination by a vote of the governing body that they're going to just elect to fund the essential purposes for their common ownership community. And that's things that are essential for their health and safety, for structural integrity, and essential functioning. Okay. But when the governing body is making that determination, we'll see here that, let's see, in V, there's no line numbers because it's a reprint, but in Roman 5 here, all unit owners shall be given reasonable notice in advance of a vote on an initial or a renewal of a financial hardship determination. That way, everyone's aware of what's going on. The sub paragraph 2 is just saying that a vote on an initial or renewal of a hardship determination can only be taken at a open or a regular or special meeting. And that way it's not being done in a closed meeting. It's just extra clear about how this is going to be happening. There's another provision here in Roman 4. This is related to that. The governing body, after they're making a determination that they've experienced or are experiencing a financial hardship, they need to make good faith efforts to resume funding reserves as required by the existing law. There's a couple more clarifying points on this, that they have to do documentation and they have to treat these documents as records that are available in accordance with the normal document procedures that are the case for the members of the common ownership community. The next part of the bill.
Hang on a second, Ben. Let's pause there just in case. And if we could, Ben, let's just pause at each point so we can give the members an opportunity to discuss it. So we can, at the end, we have completed all the discussion. So the hardship provision, ladies and gentlemen, was basically because we have received some concerns all across the state that because some COCs haven't been doing their due diligence, we have provided this to get them back up to speed, but we are not eliminating the requirement for them to have the reserve study. And that's all this does. All right, go ahead, Ben.
Thanks, Chair Holmes. Okay, the next part, I have it up here on the screen. It's in paragraph 4 here. What this is doing is further clarifying an existing provision from the bill as introduced, Chair Holmes. The governing body, it says, of a residential condominium, in this case, shall annually review the reserves and the most recent reserve study or updated reserve study to determine whether there's adequate funding in accordance with the funding plan that's required. This is not intended to be costly. It's intended to be a straightforward review of the of how their funding is going. It's not supposed to require another reserve study. I don't think the plain language suggests that. And yeah, it's just a provision to help people stay on track.
Perfect. Thanks, Ben. Go ahead to the next one.
Okay, so the next one, let's see here. Um, okay. On page 10, this is on line 21 here. This is the section about funding plans. Funding plans are what the common ownership community is using as their guide based on what the reserve study gives them. So the funding plan is their plan to fund their reserves. And in two here in lines 20 to 22, we're just adding that we're making another clarification that it's required that they have to select one of the following methods for their funding plan. There was some like okay, that's another point, Chair Holmes.
And as all of you recall, members of the subcommittee, I indicated to you in previous legislation, I on purpose did not specify the types of funding because I wanted the reserve study specialist to coordinate that type of funding with the community managers and the board of directors. However, by me leaving the types of funding out, it was totally misinterpreted that I meant full funding. And I went through that at the committee. Maybe I went through too much detail, but I went through that in the committee hearing to give the explanation of the types of funding. So this time, I am listing the types of funding for the community manager and the board of directors to choose from. Okay? Thanks, Ben.
Okay, thank you, Chair Holmes. Okay, the next point, this is one thing, Chair Holmes, I think that came up with some maybe constituents or other individuals raised to you after the meeting last week. In lines 16 to 19, you can see the word fully is struck. That was struck with the discussion last week, but just again, I think because it came up after the discussion last week, just
Yes.
again reiterating that that was struck because it has to be funded in accordance with the funding plan for the reserve study. And so, you're not going to have to fully fund the funding plan is not going to require full funding, immediately. It's a plan for the funding. Okay. Then let's see. The next part is now we're going towards what was mentioned at the beginning about the financial hardship, which provides for the priority. They are allowed to not fund their reserves as indicated in the reserve study, except for the essential purposes that are key to the life of the common ownership community. Those are enumerated here: health, safety, and well-being, structural integrity, essential functioning, and any other essential or critical purpose. Following discussions last week, there was a request to add heating and cooling, and that's only heating and cooling if it's a common element, as is indicated by the lead-in language here. So that's that. There was, I think, just one other point, Chair Holmes.
Sure.
Okay, let's see. There was, I think, another point of clarification was the usage of how the annual review is going to be, whether there's adequate funding. That was just the last point. Previously, it was accuracy, but I think the language is relatively clear here. They're the HOAs, the condos, and the cooperative housing corporations. They need to be making sure there's adequate funding, and adequate funding is clarified that it's, in accordance with the funding plan. So you know what adequate funding looks like.
Thank you, Ben. And ladies and gentlemen, this was a tremendous effort for us to try to address concerns from constituents all across the state, trying to incorporate all of their concerns with these amendments. And I think we've made a Herculean effort to make sure that everyone is going to be taken care of here. And if I could get a motion on the amendments, I'd appreciate it.
Move the amendments, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Thank you. And there's a motion and a second on the amendments. Any discussion on these amendments, please?
Yep.
Yes, sir. Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could we just talk about the hardship provision one more time? I just want to make sure that I understand what that does and how it looks again. I'm sorry.
Exactly. That's fine. That's fine. Ben, let's go back to the hardship provision. And in the hardship provision amendment, if you could expand upon the time frame and the limitations that this hardship provision can be taken. And again, this was done because of some of the common ownership communities across the state that haven't adhered to best practices in the past. We just want to get them up to speed. Quite frankly, if this bill, a reserve study bill, had been done 15 years ago, we would not need this. I'm just trying to get everyone up to speed now. Ben, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Holmes. Okay, so as you know, as we know, there's the reserve studies. They have to budget for reserves. The reserves are what's an assessment of what's needed for the common elements of the community. They have there's two existing law provisions that instruct people on how to be budgeting for reserves. C1 here, line 8, they need to be providing reserves in their annual budget, which is the funding amount here in Roman 1. That's the funding amount recommended in the most recent reserve study or the updated reserve study. Okay, so that's how they know what they need to be budgeting for. In paragraph 2, there's this ramp up for the people who have just had their initial reserve study. So they get 5 years to attain the funding level. But in each of those two provisions, paragraph 1 and 2, there's it's subject to paragraph 2 is this one about the ramp up, and then paragraph 3 is the financial hardship. And so the way it works is the governing body of each of the communities can determine by a 2/3 vote that they are experiencing a financial hardship. They're the individuals who they're entrusted with the responsibility of governing their community. From there, they can make that determination. If they make that determination, they can, as you can see in sub paragraph 1 here, they can deviate from the reserve funding requirements that are from that requirement that, we looked at the 1 or the 2 above. They can determine that that requirement is something they have a financial hardship with and need to reasonably deviate. However, the funding level under that requirement needs to still be at least the amount necessary for their essential purposes, right? So that's what we had talked about. And then doing that determination is still subject to things like it only lasts for the fiscal year following that determination. They can renew it, but it's still, and then they also have to make the good faith efforts, and they have to give notice to their members that that's being done, which is based off of prior existing practice.
And if I could expand upon that, Delegate Naraki, we have had many, many cases of community managers absconding with monies from common ownership communities, leaving these common ownership communities in a lurch. And because of that, they are faced with either special assessments, which could result in liens on persons' properties. So we're trying to give persons an opportunity to catch up, maximum that 1 year and then the 1 year provision. That's the whole purpose is Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for explaining that again. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions on the amendments? Okay, I'm scrolling. I see no hands on the amendments. All in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye.
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 If I could get a motion, in objection to the amendments, signify by saying no. Any abstentions on the amendments? Seeing none, the bill as amended is before us. Could I have a motion, please?
In favor.
Thank you,
Second.
sir.
Second.
And we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the bill as amended? I see Delegate Baker. Yes, sir. Unmute yourself.
Unmuted.
Okay.
So on these studies, can the HOAs do their own study? They have all of the information within the bill that they need to prepare for. And so, or would they have to get an outside firm to do the study for them?
Yes, and I was very specific. We were very specific in terms of who can conduct the study. And let me give you the reason for that.
Well, answer my question. Are the members of the HOA permitted to do the study?
No,
Okay. So that's all I needed on that. So the
they are in
repairs,
consult. The members of the HOA, the board of directors, and the community managers are in consultation with the reserve study specialist.
that they have to pay.
That is correct. Yes.
Okay, so if I own one of those units and repairs are needed inside my individual unit, the owner is responsible for their own units inside?
I think you're mixing up insurance requirements versus reserve study funding. Reserve study,
You can't use the reserve, you can't use the reserves study funding to do repairs to your home inside.
no.
Okay. And then the other thing, Ben had talked about trying to keep it from being costly. I don't know what the definition of costly is. I need to know a money range, a cost range. 5,000 to 100,000, $5 to $20. I don't know what the definition of costly is.
Are you referring to the cost of the reserve study?
Correct.
Okay, the cost of the reserve study varies, and let me tell you why it varies.
Well, I understand all of that. So what would that variation in dollars be?
Let him continue.
Okay.
I don't have an exact amount, but if you have a 24 unit townhouse
I understand.
community versus a community that has 6 high rises,
I understand.
obviously the cost is going to vary depending upon the size of your common ownership community. And the larger the community, the cost is split between more persons.
I understand.
Okay. I can't give you an exact amount per person for each reserve study, however.
All right, sir. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Any additional questions?
Mr. Chair, I have my hand raised. I was just going to say to Delegate Baker's point, it also depends on the infrastructure needs of the facility. And so what a 24 unit townhouse community needs versus 6 high rises may be different as it relates to infrastructure, as it relates to HVAC, as it relates to plumbing, as it relates to those will be different. So it will vary depending on the types of a facility that you have. And I hope that makes better sense for you. So there isn't like you can't pinpoint a you can't really pinpoint a number other than saying the more that you have, of course, the more it's going to cost, I would argue.
Yes, that's exactly correct. And the more persons that it is divided upon to equal out the cost per person. Yes, exactly correct. Any additional questions on HB 292 as amended? I'm scrolling through. I don't see any questions. Okay. Therefore, I have a motion and a second on HB 292. I'm going to go through a roll call here. Delegate Allen,
Yes.
Delegate Boyce,
Yes.
Delegate Healy,
Aye.
Delegate Long is not here. Delegate Stewart,
Yes.
Delegate Baker,
No.
Delegate Siliberti is not on. Delegate Naraki.
No.
And that is 1, 2, 3, 4 yeses and 2 nos. 4-2. HB 292 will receive a favorable report from the Housing and Real Property Subcommittee. Ben, if you could now go to HB 295, I certainly would appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Chair Holmes. So HB 295, the title is Real Property, Condominiums and Homeowners Associations, Governing Bodies and Annual Meetings. This bill has amendments that I'll pull up in a moment. There is no fiscal impact, and the general theme for the bill is for HOAs and condos and the transition of control from the developer or the declarant, and that's the term for the entity that initially controls, the lots or the body that is the HOA or the condominium before they're all sold or distributed. So,
And thank you, Ben.
okay. And if I may, Chair Holmes, I can go through the
Sure.
the
Expand it just a little bit, please.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. So let's see. There's a few parts of this: meetings, the governing body, and then the books and records of these communities. For let's see, for the meet as we go through the bill. So the first part is this is requiring at least one meeting each year where that's going to be open on to any matter relating to the body. This is the same type of thing we had with the last bill where they're like mirroring the provisions. So the first one, the really the condo section for this. But again, it's about how until a meeting's held in accordance with paragraph 18, they're going to have an opportunity to provide a comment. And paragraph 18 is what refers to the election of the board of directors for these communities. Or for HOAs, it's until they have a majority of votes in the HOA. So this way, these members get a chance to be heard. Okay. The next part, as I keep scrolling. So the next part here, this is about the governing body. And so as you can see there, if there is a board of directors, in this case for condos, that is established by the developer within 30 days of the point when the units that represent 25% of the entire condo have been sold to a unit owner and is not affiliated with the developer, they will be able to they'll be appointed to the board. So that's another way of ensuring that there's representation on the board and that they're aware of what's going on, especially as it's transitioning from the developer control to the unit owner control. This Roman 2 there is another part of this where if there is no board of directors, in this case for condos that's been established, then the developer has to establish a board for the council and appoint one member. So either way, whether there is a board in existence or if there's no board, they're getting representation on the board. And then this is clarification about how that determination is made, which is referring to the entire all the units. Okay. The next part, this part was the amendment. There was some testimony. Let's see here. The MBIA notes that what this concerns is the developer providing notice to each member about bonds that were provided by the developer to a governmental unit in connection with the development. And so this is a notice requirement for all the unit owners. The basis for the amendment is so that the bonds are the concept or rationale is that these are between the developer and the jurisdiction that's issuing the bonds or the governmental unit. So they're the parties to that contract. The unit owners don't have a claim to the bonds, and they're not generally posted. And the concern is that it's mixing the obligations, or that there could be interference with the bonds that is agreed to between these two parties. The OAG's office was noted that there can be a concern when there is maybe the developer, like they've had a situation they mentioned in their testimony about bonds on the roads being released without their knowledge, yet the community still needs repairs or the repairs weren't adequate. So that was the other side to that. And then the last piece is the books and records here, which is pretty straightforward. It's just providing that the record keeping begins on the date that the council of unit owners or the HOA is established, and it must be kept separate from the developer. And currently is just a general requirement to keep books and records. So that's the bill and the amendments.
Thank you, Ben. And ladies and gentlemen, the whole purpose of this is because at the present time, we do not have a mandatory training requirement for board of directors. We need to have something where there's some intellectual history on what is taking place when the declarant removes themselves from the common ownership community and when the citizens take over. So at the 25% point, they will have one member of the community that is going to be a board member and attends the meetings with the declarant, the developer. And once the whole community is taken over, that one member at least has some intellectual history about what took place during the time frame before the transition. And that's the whole crux of it there. Because we've received many concerns about the declarant reaching that point and then just handing over the books to the community and say, you go for it, I'm out, you take it over. And I think this is something that the citizens across the state of Maryland need. Delegate Boyce, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I think you just answered my question on the last note about all books and records kept separately. When the developer does turn over after they've had their board and then they pass it over, they do pass those records on to the council of what the unit owners.
You are 100% correct.
Okay, just clarifying. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay. Is there, can I get a motion on the amendments, please?
Move the amendment.
And second, we have a motion and a second on the amendments. Any questions on the amendments to HB 295? Seeing none, all in favor of the amendments on HB 295 signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposition to the amendments on 295? Any abstentions on 295 amendments? Seeing none, we now have before us the bill as amended. Do we have a motion?
Move the bill, Mr. Chair.
We have a motion and a second on HB 295 as amended. Any questions on HB 295 as amended? Seeing none, let me call the roll. Delegate Allen,
Yes.
Delegate Boyce,
Yes.
Delegate Healy,
Yes.
Delegate Long, Delegate Stewart,
Yes.
Delegate Baker,
Yes.
Delegate Shiliberti, Delegate Naraki.
Yes.
Thank you. 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, I forgot to count myself. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 to 0. This bill will receive a favorable report from the Housing and Real Property Subcommittee on HB 295. The next bill is, let me go to my agenda here.
339, Chair Holmes.
Next bill is 339. Yes, sir. All right, Ben, can you discuss with us HB 339, please?
Okay, thanks, Chair Holmes. So the title of the bill is Real Property, Residential Rental Apartments, Air Conditioning Requirements. There's no state fiscal impact. There may be a meaningful impact for small businesses and local government. What this bill relates to is residential rental units in apartment buildings and air conditioning. Okay. Specifically, it's apartment buildings with 4 or more individual dwelling units. I'll pull up the amendments, Chair Holmes, now, and we'll go through maybe the bill and the amendments at the same time. Is that
Yes, that'd be great.
okay? Okay. Chair Holmes, I believe Delegate Healy has their hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Delegate Healy, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about how this bill relates to places where people have window air conditioners. There's a lot of older buildings, as you know, in Prince George's County, where people there isn't any HVAC. Everybody's got, heating, whatever system they've got, but they have window air conditioners, and sometimes they pay extra for the extra electricity to have a window air conditioner in their unit, and then they have to provide their own air conditioning unit. Does this change that? How does that work for those kind of places?
Well, let's do this. I think after Ben goes through the amendments, it may answer some of your questions.
Okay, thank you. I'll listen.
Not a problem. Ben, let's go through the amendments on the bill first, and then we'll come back to Delegate Healy.
Okay, sounds good. So yeah, like I mentioned, as we see here, the bill is applying to residential rental units in apartment buildings with 4 or more individual dwelling units. So that's kind of like the scope of what's being subject to the provisions of this bill. There's an exception for the historic places. The first part, I have a couple of comments here from the sponsor of the bill that I received today, but I'll still go through the bill and we should be good. The first part of the bill here is that the landlord, again, for the apartment building with 4 or more units, is going to provide air conditioning in each unit in accordance with subsection C, which we'll get to. And that is going to start beginning in June 1, 2025 for new construction, and then beginning October 1, 2025 for residential rental units that are undergoing a renovation that includes either the replacement or upgrade of electrical systems or heating systems. Those are kind of the 2 triggers for what is going to be subject to the air conditioning requirements. And the requirements are provided in more detail below. You can see here I have the upgrade added. The sponsor of the bill was mentioning that they felt strongly that or upgrade should be added, as I've tried to indicate in the bill here, because I think my understanding was that they were concerned that replacement might be too narrow. And that upgrade, it's not just the replacement of your electrical system or your heating system. It could also be the upgrading of your electrical system or your heating system. So that's why that's reflected. Now, we had talked about the 2 triggers. Now we're getting to the substantive part of the bill about how that air conditioning is provided. The language you're looking at now is based off of what's in Prince George's County and Montgomery County for their local air conditioning requirements. I think we heard about that in the testimony at the bill hearing, the testimony and possible discussion for the bill last year as it was before the committee, which used very similar language to this. So as we have speaking to the substantive provisions here, unless there's reasonable maintenance or repair each year, the sponsor is asking that we change the date a little bit, but it says each year from right now, June 1 to September 30th, the landlord who is in the apartment building, who's done either the construction or doing the renovation, shall be providing air conditioning in each residential rental unit as follows. For the AC systems that aren't in the control of the tenant, the landlord needs to maintain the temperature in the unit at not greater than 80 degrees. That's not prescribing how they do that, central air or other method, window units. And then the second part is if the AC system is under the control of the tenant, the landlord needs to ensure that the system that's in their control is going to work and achieve the temperature threshold that's in the bill. Yeah, and with the dates here, the sponsor of the bill mentioned that they thought it should probably be 15. I think their initial language in their bill, we struck the ASHRAE standard because I think it was a little too complicated, and that was some testimony we received. But the initial bill also had June 1 to September 30th there in line 13, but they're asking it to just be May 15th instead. So just putting that out there as well.
Okay, I see a couple of hands up, but I promised that we would hear questions from Delegate Healy first. Delegate Healy?
Yeah, I think that most of what you said is helps me understand it, but I still wonder if I mean, it's not really an air conditioning system if you have window units only.
Well, in some cases, the reason why it is worded the way it is, because we wanted to make sure that if there's a building that does not have central air conditioning, we can still provide air conditioning units
Okay,
in for the tenants.
got it. Got it. Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you. Next, I'm going to go to Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a couple questions. Maybe this is Ben or maybe this is somebody else. Could someone describe what constitutes an upgrade to an electrical system? Clearly, I understand what a replacement is, but upgrade seems really wide open. Is that literally like I replace an electrical outlet and all of a sudden now I've upgraded the electrical system and that triggers provisions here?
That's a good question. In the legislation here, do we have anything that defines that upgrade in existing language, Ben, or current language?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that, Chair Holmes. I think Chair Stewart also has their hand up too, if you want.
Delegate Stewart?
I don't know of any definition in code. I was just going to say, I mean, when you think about the types of upgrades or replacements that you could do to your heating system or cooling system or electrical system or whatever, I mean, the stuff that comes to mind for me would be like, basically number one would be replacing in like an older, less efficient system with a new one. That would fall under replace, but also upgrade. You could switch to like a high efficiency boiler or something like that for a heating system. I think that would also be a replacement. One thing I think would be an upgrade that would not be a replacement is adding something new, like for example, like smart thermostats. But again, I think you could argue that if you went from an older thermostat to a new thermostat system, that would also count as a replacement. So again, like you could upgrade to a heat pump system. I think that would be, again, you'd probably be replacing things. I mean, the difference between upgrade and replacement is really just, is something being removed for something else? That's a replacement. An upgrade does not, it includes those things that are replacements, but I assume she's trying to go beyond to say, if you add some new feature to your electrical or heating system without replacing it. But I struggle to think of an example that would be an upgrade without a replacement. But it looks like maybe the vice chair has an example.
Well, one of the other things that could be taking place is that in a lot of the older buildings in the state of Maryland, they have aluminum wiring. And in this aluminum wiring systems, it's very difficult to add more loads onto that aluminum wiring, like adding AC unit, window AC units. If you did that with the aluminum wiring, you would overload the system and you would shut down electricity for the entire building. But once you upgrade for the current the new system, the current systems, I think that would kick it in.
Mr. Chair, I certainly appreciate what you're saying there, and I appreciate what Delegate Stewart is saying and others, but again, I think we're speculating what it could be. I don't know that any of us can definitively say it at the moment. Maybe the Vice Chair can. It looks like maybe she can. I'm just worried that something like, we put some new LED light bulbs in, and all of a sudden that becomes an upgrade somehow to the electrical system, and it triggers this provision.
Good questions, though, Delegate Naraki. Let's go to Delegate Boyce.
Only if Delegate Naraki is finished with his questions.
I do have some others, Madam Vice Chair, but I would love to hear what you have to say there.
Yeah, no, I think upgrade, I thought about this at first. I was like, well, it's the same thing. It's not. Like a replacement is like, if I've got, that big early 2000s, 1990 refrigerator that goes up, I go to the used store and I replace it with something like exactly. That's a replacement. I'm just putting back in there what was there. An upgrade would mean I'd go from that white, 1990 box to like a 2000s silver. It's an upgrade. It's an upgrade from what you have. So I do see that upgrade is different versus replacement. Replacement is just putting back what you already have. Upgrade is going above what you had. That's how I see the difference between replacement and upgrade. Although in this replacement, in this definition of if includes a replacement, the replacement would mean, it sounds like here, that you wouldn't be replacing, you would have to be upgrading. Based on this, like you would have to renovate if you decide to say, I'm going to replace this. You're not actually replacing it. You're actually going to be given an upgrade, because if you have, I don't know if this speaks to the age of like a window unit. Suppose you do have an apartment building that has window units. What this sounds like to me, if I needed to then go through my units and make changes, I wouldn't be replacing it with the same type. I'd be upgrading. I would have to upgrade to whatever the most newer standards are. That's how I see replacement and upgrade as different.
Sure, and
that makes sense.
No, and it does, Madam Vice Chair. It does make sense. I'm just concerned that it's so open-ended that a lot of things could potentially be an upgrade. I think what you're saying is clearly an upgrade, Madam Vice Chair, but I think that there are, minor changes to the electrical system may be perceived as an upgrade. And I'm not sure that's the spirit.
But this goes back to the bill talks about HVAC systems. So if I need to replace the water heater, or if I need to replace the furnace, if the furnace is your central air unit and you didn't have central air and you had to have a window unit, you would be upgrading that HVAC system to be able to produce central air. Is how I see this.
Well, that's and I know Delegate Naraki, you have several questions.
Yeah.
Let's attempt to.
Okay. I'll move on to my next question, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, let's attempt to extinguish this one first before we go to the next one. Delegate Healy, is your question? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to expand a little bit on this upgrade concept, because I think that we're talking about upgrading the electrical system. You mentioned the aluminum wires, but there's also like just an old-fashioned system where you don't have adequate electricity for all those air conditioners. Even if you have to put window air conditioners in, you might need to upgrade your electricity so that it can handle more current to go into.
That's correct.
You're going to go from 110 to 220 or whatever those things are, where you have more drain on the system. You have to upgrade the whole system.
That's correct. Delegate Stewart.
Yeah, I love these fascinating definitional questions. So I think that, Delegate Boyce is definitely getting at something that's just correct, right? Which is that when you say upgrade, sometimes that does mean that you're like improving something, you're getting something new that's improved, whereas replacement sometimes is genuinely a one-to-one thing. Like my TV broke and I'm going to replace it with a the same model of television because I really like that one. But I think it can also mean a different thing, which is that like I recently, when I installed an EV charger at my home, my electrical circuit box was old. It was like from the original house in the early 1970s. So I had an option from the electrician. I could either upgrade my existing circuit breaker by essentially adding new higher amperage breakers to the existing circuit, which was cheaper, but was probably not going to last as long. Or I could replace my electrical circuit with a new model, not a one-to-one, but with a new model from 2024, as opposed to from 1964. And I opted for the replacement, which was more expensive, but probably will save me money in the long run. So in that case, a replacement is like a more wholesale change, whereas an upgrade does encompass other types of electrical work that is less than, therefore expanding the bill to other situations.
Thank you, Delegate Stewart. And I see Delegate Naraki, you're trying to pinpoint, but I pinpoint something more specifically. But I think the explanations that were given kind of outline the differences between the two.
Mr. Chair,
I'm hopeful that it does.
explanations. I'm just concerned about, and maybe you're right. Maybe I'm trying to get to something more specific, like a dollar amount or something like that. I'm just concerned that we do a $5 upgrade to an electrical system, and that all of a sudden becomes the basis to kick in all these provisions. I guess that's where my concern is there with that, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right. Delegate Stewart has his hand up again.
What if we added substantial as an adjective word modifying upgrade?
Delegate Stewart, I think that would make that much stronger there.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a suggested amendment relevant to the renovations in the upgrade area, and that suggested amendment is substantial. And as we all know, that word substantial is throughout housing statutes throughout the real estate book. So we have an amendment before us to add to replace that word to include substantial. Okay. All right. So we'll add that. We'll add that to we'll add that word substantial to our list of amendments, and then we'll go through and approve all the amendments simultaneously. Delegate Boyce?
I just want to clarify that this new amendment would be renovations that would be undergo renovation that includes the substantial replacement or upgrade of electrical systems for heating systems.
Yes, the substantial replacement or upgrade of the electrical system or heating systems.
Thank you, sir.
I would say replacement or substantial upgrade. I think a replacement doesn't need to be modified by anything. A replacement is a replacement. I would say the replacement or the substantial upgrade.
Replacement or substantial upgrade. Replacement. We've got to put the or in there.
What do you think about that, Naraki?
Madam Vice Chair, I think that's much stronger. Mr. Chair, I think that is a much stronger piece of language there. I think that's much more clearly defined, in my opinion.
Great.
Mr. Chair, may I ask? I have two more, if that's okay.
Absolutely correct. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Okay, and I think this is probably been answered by Delegate Healy's question, but just for my edification, so it is okay to utilize some sort of portable units. It doesn't need to necessarily be a central HVAC system in this bill. It could be a window unit or some other portable cooling device. Is that?
That is 100% correct.
Okay. And then my only other question, Mr. Chair, is about that May 15th date. I'm concerned that in May, I know that we're dealing in some cases here with older buildings. When you switch the system over, the boiler over, it's got to be switched over at that point. In the beginning of May, you could still be dealing with cooler weather sometimes. I'm just wondering if that could pose logistical problems for some of these older buildings as opposed to like June 1st, which is when we, typically really start to see more kind of summer weather.
Well, there's a couple things here. Number one is that those dates, we're trying to make it consistent with existing law in other jurisdictions. That's number one. And number two, the temperature control is based upon 80 degrees, 3 feet from the floor. So, it's kind of, if the temperature in on May, May 30th or something like that, is not above 80, then something else. Ben, you want to chime in here?
Okay, thanks, Jerome's. I was just going to say, if it's helpful, the Montgomery County legislation or law that was mentioned in the hearing and some of the testimony too, they have their dates is June 1 to September 30th.
Oh,
Just
that's Montgomery County.
that's Montgomery County. Yeah.
Okay, Delegate Boyce.
Thanks, Delegate Naraki, because that's actually why I had my hand up to begin with. That was the question I had. And is Prince George's County also June 1st to September 30th?
That is correct.
And is it fair to say we should be, one, consistent with everyone else, and two, nothing in here would prohibit a housing provider to decide that they could start this earlier, right? Like it's not that they couldn't say that like May 1 is their time, because that's when they start cleaning furnaces and HVAC systems to begin getting ready for like AC units for the summer.
Nothing prohibits that at all.
I mean, the May 15th, I don't know why, but I mean, if we're going to create a consistent policy that's already consistent with two
June
other,
1st.
I feel like this should be the floor as the state and not the ceiling, just in case other local jurisdictions may want to do something different. That's just my
And June 1st would make it consistent with other jurisdictions. Delegate Stewart.
Yeah, just two quick thoughts here. One, I'm not a huge fan of the May 15 date. I think first having June 1 is nice for consistency, not only in a substantive matter, but also in a procedural political matter of making sure the Senate is with us. I mean, I think we have kind of a consensus here between tenant and landlord advocates over the current bill, and I don't want to overturn that apple cart of consensus and imperil our chances in JPR by going at all even slightly away from what Montgomery and Prince George's are doing. So that's the political point. The more substantive point is actually heating is more expensive for landlords than cooling. So the traditional problem, and I used to live in New York City. New York City actually passed a law requiring landlords to heat their buildings until May 31st because they had the problem of it still being cold in May, as Delegate Naraki said, and then landlords cutting off the heat in like April to try to save cost and then flipping it to the AC. So I just worry that by trying to be protective to tenants by moving up to May 15, we could actually have the unintended consequence of forcing landlords to switch from heating to AC too early. And then all of a sudden they're, providing, they're being forced to provide the less expensive thing, which could be, I think, very problematic for especially seniors who want to be cooler, when it still can be, chillier days. Or sorry, want to be warmer when it can still be chillier days. So
I appreciate that. So I'm getting a feeling from the committee that we would like to make that June 1st through September 30th. Is that something that the subcommittee would like to change? June 1st through September 30th?
I would. It would be more comfortable for me as someone who doesn't have AC, central air, and who does have window units. I usually do not turn those units on until like late June, actually.
Okay. Is there any objection from the subcommittee members of changing the time frame from June 1st to September 30th? Any objection to changing that amendment? Changing that? I see none. Thank you, Ben. Delegate Naraki, I want to make sure I got all your questions in.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Move the amendments.
There's a motion and there's a second. Any questions on the amendments to HB 339? Seeing no questions to HB 339. All in favor of the amendments on 339 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition to the amendments? Any abstentions? Seeing none, we have the bill before us as amended. Do I have a motion?
Move the bill, Mr. Chair.
Second.
And there's a motion and a second on HB 339 as amended. Any questions on HB 339 as amended? Seeing none, Delegate Allen,
Yes.
Delegate Boyce,
Yes.
Delegate Healy,
Yes.
Delegate Long, Delegate Stewart,
Yes.
Delegate Baker,
No.
Delegate Shiliberti, Delegate Naraki,
No.
that's it. And Holmes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 yeses and 2 nos. This bill will receive a favorable report from the Housing and Real Property Subcommittee to the full committee. And now, what's the next bill here, Ben? I don't have my agenda in front of me.
It's 489, Chair Holmes,
489.
the study on building code requirements.
Exactly. Okay, so give us some info on HB 489, please.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. The title of the bill is Maryland Department of Labor Study on Building Code Requirements for Single Staircase Buildings. We had the hearing. Let's see here. What this talks about is the approach for the design for buildings to provide more light and provide air, acoustic, privacy. That's typically available for single detached family buildings. I have a visual aid, Chair Holmes, that might help.
Oh, sure, that'd be great.
Okay. So 1 second. This, I think, is the adequate representation of kind of like the approach with single stair, which is the top, and then double loaded corridors, which are going to be more common, or which is the norm and in the state. So that's kind of what the goal of the study is to look at the code requirements. I can go through the amendments now, Chair Holmes, too, in the bill, if that works.
That'd be great. And go through the amendments, please, Ben. And I want to make sure everyone understands the key word here is this is a study. Go ahead, Ben, please.
Okay, great. So yeah, there's some more testimony. There's a favorable from the realtors and MBIA. They were noting that these single staircase building designs are still accompanied by additional fire safety features. They help reduce affordability, they help increase affordability, make buildings more affordable because which is typically 15 to 25%. By removing the requirement for a second stairwell. And it also opens up more small and mid-sized parcels to housing options that are not currently feasible under current regulations. So it's been noted that this is something that is being done across the country, including Washington, New York, Hawaii, Tennessee, Minnesota, and Virginia. And so now getting into the study, we have the Department of Labor, who handles most of the code enforcement, conducting the study on the code requirements for single staircase buildings in the state and other states. And then they're going to be making recommendations on possible legislative or regulatory changes to authorize single staircase buildings up to 6 stories above the grade plane in the state to, as it says there, increase affordable housing supply by reducing barriers to multifamily housing development. Similar study language that you see with lots of studies. They're doing a survey of state and local laws across North America. They're looking at best practices for local governments when drafting building code requirements. They are considering a number of things that probably would relate to fire safety. So that's one thing I think that is is contemplated by the bill here. As you see in Roman 2, the presence and response capability of a professional fire department, which again is going to be based on this analysis of the best practices. They're taking into consideration those types of things like the response capability, the feasibility of compliance with fire codes, impacts on housing development, cost of housing, and any other factors determined by the Department of Labor. And then to be making legislative and regulatory recommendations such as amendments to the Performance Standards Act. And then the two parts here about the amendments, Chair Holmes. The department is consulting with the Office of the State Fire Marshal. This is the state police testimony is asking to add the state fire marshal to be in consultation, which the sponsor did not have an objection to. They were good with that. This was also echoed in testimony from Preservation Maryland. Let's see, and so the second part of the amendment you can see here is we're extending the study date a year. That was based off of discussions with the Department of Labor. The existing bill's fiscal note says that general fund expenditures increased by 106,000 only in 2026 for contractual staff. But following their review of this amendment, they were advising that this would decrease the fiscal note significantly, and then they added by as much as half with an extra 12 months. So that's kind of the rationale behind that. There's a couple of other pieces of testimony, but about one was from AIA. They had some wide-ranging testimony about they were noting issues that seem like they are all covered by the kind of the general language in C2 about code practices. So it seemed like that was addressed. And then they were also talking about fire safety, which, we kind of spoke to earlier. They're looking at Roman 2, Roman 3, and it's being done in consultation with the Office of the State Fire Marshal. There was some testimony that they wanted to add from another organization, Preservation Maryland. They state that they represent the statewide voice for historic preservation. But part of and so they wanted to add, like I said, a representative that had that same sort of a representative of the preservation and Main Street communities. But there is an existing provision here on viability of redevelopment or adaptive reuse of historic properties. So I think that is probably covered by that provision. Senator McKay submitted testimony stating that the Fire EMS Coalition believes this would make our building fire code weaker and create a precedent where citizens could be at risk. But as we've discussed, it's a study on building code requirements for best practices. It's a practice that is used across in the rest of the world and other jurisdictions, like we mentioned. Other jurisdictions like Baltimore City is moving forward with single stair legislation. So this is going to hopefully help make sure that the approach maybe is the best informed it can be. And
Thank you, Ben.
Thanks.
And the only two amendments on this bill is adding the state fire marshal and extending the effective date. Is that correct, Ben?
That's correct.
All right, thank you very much. I would like to get a motion on the amendments, please.
Move the amendments.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you very much. In any discussion on the amendments? Seeing none, all in favor of the amendments signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition to the amendments? Seeing or hearing none, the amendments have been adopted. Can I get a motion on HB 489 as amended, please?
Move the bills amended.
Thank you
Second.
very much. Is there a second?
Second, Mr. Chair.
Second. Thank you very much. Any questions on HB 489 as amended? Seeing no questions, we'll go through the roll call. Delegate Allen,
Yes.
Delegate Boyce,
Yes.
Delegate Healy,
Aye.
Delegate Long, Delegate Stewart,
Yes.
Delegate Baker,
Check.
Say again?
Yes.
Delegate Shiliberti, Delegate Naraki,
Yes.
and I say yes as well. Us unanimous. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7-0. This bill will receive a favorable amendment from the Housing and Real Property Subcommittee to the full committee. We will now go to the next bill. Ben, if you could pull that up, please, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks, Chair Holmes. Okay, this one, Chair Holmes, is a discussion only. I believe you had indicated on your agenda. It's the title is Housing and Community Development. It's a departmental bill, the homeless shelter certification program. It's cross-filed with Senate Bill 234. The fiscal impact, general fund expenditures increased by 245,000 in fiscal year 2026. Local expenditures may increase to the extent that homeless shelters operated by local governments must be upgraded to comply with the standards established by DHCD. There's
Hey,
amendments.
hang on a second, Ben. Pull the bill up.
Of course. Okay. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, of course. Okay. So let's see, there's amendments from the department. There was a small change that the subcommittee should have received to that. But I have that version up now, and I can go through the bill as
Thank
quickly
you.
as I can, Chair Holmes. Yeah, and efficiently. Okay. So last year, this committee passed the study on the establishment of a homeless shelter licensing program. This bill is a product of the work from that study. It mirrors the study's findings for the certification program and the standards for shelters. There's no state entity charged with the licensure or regulation of homeless shelters. The Division of Homeless Solutions in DHCD administers that program. The division, it's called the Homelessness Solutions Program, which currently serves as a statewide response to homelessness in Maryland, but this is more of a broader certification program. So under the bill, DHCD will operate a homeless shelter certification program and adopt regulations. This is going to be for things like operational standards, minimum requirements, and a tiered certification system. The definition for shelter in the bill, this is going to be what, kind of the common understanding with the facilities that provide temporary overnight sleeping accommodations, meals, basic needs assistance, and supportive services for individuals who are homeless. It includes hotels and motels that are utilized as a primary as a primary means of shelter, but it does not include if it's for disaster or emergency, if there's a lease, or hotels or motels that are used only for temporary overflow. Okay. There is not a religious exemption or an exemption for temporary shelters. My understanding for the rationale is that providing a shelter and care for homeless individuals should be subject to standards across the board. And there's been issues about people being removed from shelters. We've heard about at the hearing based on a number of factors, like their gender identity, things like that. There was concern that would be too broad of an exemption. And there is, like I mentioned, tiers for certification that we'll look at, briefly. So that helps provide more flexibility in the types of standards that different shelters are being subject to. Okay, so I'll go through it quickly here. 61402, this is just that the building may not be used as a shelter unless the operator has been certified by the department. You can see the word owner struck. That was an amendment just because it could be a scenario where perhaps like the operator's renting the space from an owner, and this is sort of like a more precise way to refer to the person in charge of the shelter or the entity. So the shelter operations in 61402C, they need to apply for certification to be using it as a shelter, and that has to be renewed every 2 years. Let's see. They may be subject to inspections of the premises by DHCD. 61403 requires the application to be certified. You have to show that you're meeting operational and building standards there. 16403, 14031, 161404. This is the contemplation about the tiered system in A there, and that's going to be based off the size, the duration of the shelter provided, and the type of services provided. Okay. Let's see, 161404B here. This is a substantive regulation provision. It's authorizing DHCD to adopt regulations for and minimum requirements for a bunch of things related to the homeless shelters organization. These are things like governance, visitation, emergency procedures, non-discrimination, heating, cooling, fire prevention. There's domestic protections and protocols for individuals who are survivors of domestic violence. Gender-based violence was added as amendment. Asbestos, lead paint, and let's see. So yes, C and D here, the department's going to establish a shelter bill of rights with the minimum standards, and then also a grievance process there for homeless individuals. Let's see, E is about providing trainings and requiring trainings for the homeless shelters. 16405A, this is about how the operator of a shelter must participate in the homeless management information system. I'll define that term in a second, and then that's operated by the local continuum of care. That's in subsection A there. So the continuum of care is the regional or local planning body. I think DHCD will probably speak a little bit more to that, your homes, but they're the ones that coordinate housing and services for homeless individuals. There's 10 COCs or continuums of care in the state, I believe, and DHCD administers a few of them that offer services. And then this information system is it's designated by the continuum of care and to meet federal law requirements. In B there's a little more info about how this is going to work. It says the operator must enter intake and exit assessments into this system. So, that's if they consent to share the information. All right, 161405C requires an operator to participate in the centralized or coordinated assessment system that's operated by a local continuum of care. In D, these are the grounds where a shelter that they can't use to deny admission or services: race, religion, immigration status, criminal history. There's a couple of amendments on this. You'll see here we have current or past. They're striking sexual offenses, but they're adding language back in about that later. You can't deny someone on past use of alcohol or illegal drugs except if they are a threat to others, in Roman I there, line 19, and then in Roman 2, for shelters certified by the Department of Health that are recovery centers, rehabs, an individual that's assessed by the staff is ineligible for treatment, okay? They have some language about language proficiency can't be a basis for denial. The provision in E is about denying access if the shelter admits children or families with children. They're allowed to turn people who have been convicted of a sexual offense away in those instances. So let's see, and then F there concerns shelters denying homeless people or homeless individuals access based on religion or religious preference. 1406 concerns the department revoking certifications was caused. 1407 is the regulations they're adopting, and having 12 months to comply with the shelters have 12 months to comply with the regulations, but there's a good cause exception that's going to be determined by the secretary on a case-by-case basis. and if the department has evidence that the shelter is working to take corrective action. 1408 is a $10,000 penalty. That's in addition to losing certification. So if a person operates the shelter without certification or in violation of the rules, they can be subject to that $10,000 penalty. And then the last part is this was added as amendment. And this is what this is doing is there's the second phase of that study from last year's session that's going to be completed by the originally planned date of July 1, 2025. I mentioned the first phase has been completed already, which is the basis for the bill. So
Thanks, Ben. And again, ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to have a conversation on this bill. It will be back on the agenda next week. Any questions on HB 93?
Yeah, I have a few.
Yes, sir. Delegate Naraki?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one thing I just wanted some clarification on. So someone can't be denied because of active drug use. Is that how I read that? So I'm not talking about past drug use. I'm talking about active drug use. Like if someone was an IV drug user, could they, utilize heroin in the facility and not be able to be denied because of that?
Hang on a second.
Chair Holmes, if you want,
You got it?
I have it if you want me to go.
Yeah. Where is it?
In Chair Holmes, I'm happy to talk and or I think some people from DHCD are here,
Yeah,
but
go ahead.
okay, so yeah, Delegate Naraki, your question. An operator of a shelter may not deny admission or services to any individual because of the individual's current or past alcohol or use of alcohol or illegal drugs, except if they're a safety or health threat to the others. And then if they're determined that if for shelters that are for recovery, if they've been assessed as being ineligible for treatment. So those are the two exceptions to, and that's my understanding of how that works. But yeah, again, maybe DHCD would have more.
So there is something in there to try to make sure that they are safe, and doesn't cause harm to anyone else. What do you think about the language there, Delegate Naraki?
My concern, Mr. Chair, is frankly, unless, say, DHCD or someone else is going to assume liability there, I would assume that the homeless shelter would have some liability in the case of if they had someone that were, say, to overdose in their facility, that was an active IV drug user. I'm just not sure if that's fair to the shelter.
Okay. Okay, well, we'll take that question and try to flush that out. I do appreciate it. Let's go to Delegate Healy now.
Yeah, I have a few questions about this. Is there a minimum number of homeless people that somebody takes in that turns their hospitality into a shelter?
A minimum number? I'm not sure I understand.
Oh, I mean, like if you just have if you have one person that you let stay overnight at a church in a church basement, for example, just because it's really cold out and they don't have any other place to go, and you're not really set up as an institution to take care of people, but yeah, out of the goodness of your heart, you want to let somebody in out of the cold one night.
There isn't anything in the language relevant to that particular specific situation, Delegate Healy.
So does that mean that you become subject to all of this just because you open a room in the church basement to somebody who's in need?
I don't see that in the bill language, and
so that's a concern I have. Okay, that's one. And also, there's some groups of churches that do they take turns over the winter, in the worst cold of the winter, to opening their church facility, a church basement or a cafeteria, someplace that they have for a few nights, and then the people they just have people come out and help out for a few nights so that the people who are
Right.
homeless, it's not really a shelter. They go back to it, and it's only temporary. It doesn't exist as an institution. It's just an informal kind of thing where they have people come in and they prepare meals, and they, maybe they make arrangements to have a shower or washing machine or some other thing available on it for a few days or a week or less. So, and maybe for a limited number of people, maybe families, all of that. I've seen all these kind of things working even in Prince George's County. So, I just want to know if all these regulations apply to something that's like that.
That's a good question. I know my church participates in that as well. I see I see two persons that have hands up that look like they want to answer your question. Let's go to the first hand. It's Delegate Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Delegate Healy, the one scenario I think is a bit extreme. If you decide out of the goodness of your heart that you want to take somebody into your space and let them sleep there for the night, I don't think this bill applies. They're not a shelter. You're providing charity. I think to the second point, I believe the bill does cover these temporary shelters. So I think those folks are certainly are covered. And I think they're covered also. And I think DHED is here. I think I see Danielle here, that they're covered under that next phase that they're going to work through is those temporary kind of emergency shelter types where you're there for the night, you get some food, you can take a shower, you can wash some clothes. So I think you're covered in that regard.
Let me go to
and I-
Delegate. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to go back to Delegate Naraki's point. I think, first of all, to assume that we may even know what a quote unquote person who may have substance use disorder looks like, I think is somewhat discriminatory. There are functioning quote unquote drug users, and we may not know who they are, who they aren't. And so they certainly could come in. They could certainly sleep and could not have, anything on them. And so I think the bill seems like, to me, it gives shelters enough room to be able to provide services where they're needed, and in the case where they're more robust, can manage those type of, whether they're behavioral, mental health, and or substance use disorders. They can manage that, and when they can't, I think the system will work that they can then put them somewhere where they could be taken versus putting them somewhere where they don't have the resources to take them. I think the point of this bill, and I'm hoping we can all get on one accord about this, is that we cannot have homeless shelters subpar. Just because you want to do a good deed doesn't mean it has to be in a place that's, quite frankly, excuse my language, shitty. It can't be someplace where we wouldn't put someone we loved if they need an emergency. I think this is what this bill is about. And so I'm hoping that we can be on one accord to figure out how we make sure, when we need to take care of people who are the most vulnerable and do not have a place to stay, that the place that they do stay is safe, and it provides a level of comfort until they can get to where they need to get to on their own. So I will leave it with that.
Let me go to Delegate Stewart, and then I'm going to go to DHCD.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My comment might actually maybe what Danielle was going to respond to, but if you look on page 20, or sorry, page 2, line 20, for the definition of homeless shelter, I think there are two magic words here that address some of Delegate Healy's concern. Those two magic words are primary purpose. So it has to be a facility that's operated for the primary purpose of overnight sleeping. To me, that suggests that if you have a church and you're offering some room on the floor in the basement for some people to stay on an offhand way, when it's cold or just one weekend or it's Easter or whatever, to me, the facility's primary purpose is religious services. And so therefore it is not a homeless shelter under the bill's definition. Similarly, if I decide to take some homeless people in from my basement, my facility is primarily meant is my residence. The primary purpose of my facility, my home, is for me to sleep there. It's not a homeless shelter. That's not the primary purpose of my home. Now, if I decide to create a homeless shelter business, then all of a sudden maybe the primary purpose of my single family home maybe is a homeless shelter. But I think that kind of resolves some of that point. And then to Delegate Naraki's concern about drug use, I get it, right? I totally understand where he's coming from. I think that the key is not only that line that Ben read about if you're a threat to others, then they can deny you based on current drug use. I think it's also that if you look at that laundry list of things they can't deny you for, you don't see like belligerence on that list. You don't see like inability to help the person on the list, right? So I think what the bill is trying to get at is if someone comes in either because of drug, alcohol, or attitudinal issues, and they cannot be helped, and they cannot stay there either because they're a danger to themselves or others, that clearly to me is not denying them based on their drug use. You're denying them based on their belligerent, unwieldy actions. I think this prohibition is specifically like trying to get at the issue of someone walking in and being like, "Hello, sir, can I give you a breathalyzer?" Or "Hello, sir, have you been drinking tonight?" And then declining them purely based on that, even though the person, to Delegate Boyce's point, is totally functional and not at all disruptive. So just going to add that as well. But I like the bill.
Let me go to DHCD next. Danielle, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you for recognizing me, and happy to provide some clarification about our intent here on the question around illegal drugs. So it's common practice and accepted practice
Uh-oh.
in.
You there?
Did I cut out? Can you hear me okay?
I think it was just me.
Oh, okay. So on drug use, it's a common practice for shelters to not allow drug activity on site. And that would be perfectly acceptable. Like our funded programs do not have to permit drug activity on site, whether that's use or selling or even possession on site. And so, if we needed to spell this out further in regulations to be clear about that, we could do that. What we're hoping to avoid is folks who maybe have used earlier in the day and it's still in their system. For all intents and purposes, they're not providing like a safety threat. Their behavior is not causing harm to others. That's what we're intending to get to is not screening people out based on the substance being in their system, but instead making a screening out based on behavior that's threatening, right? So that's the key we're trying to get to with the drug use or alcohol use in that regard. But it is common practice for shelters not to allow that activity on site, so use would not be allowed. And we could clarify that in the regulations process if we needed to. On the question of temporary shelters. So there's lots of different types of, community-based shelters that pop up. Some open for a whole winter season. Some will open for just a week or a couple days at a time. So we have tried to create language that this really is not targeted towards those shelters that open for like a few days because there's a really big cold snap. That's not the intent of this bill. But there are a number of shelters that open, from November to March every year, and they're open for 4 to 5 months. We do intend for this bill to cover those kinds of shelters. So in the report that we did put together, where we drew a line or distinguished between the two was shelters that operate for 7 days or more, they would be required to comply, but we would give them reduced requirements for going through the certification process. So even those shelters that would be subject to it and are just cold weather shelters, the standards would be lower in terms of applying for certification. And if you have a shelter that's open for 7 nights consecutively or less, like what I would call like a pop-up shelter, they would not be subject to certification at all. They would just need to notify us that they're in operation. So that way, if we get a complaint, we can look into it. We know who to contact, but they would not have to go through the certification process.
Thank you, Danielle.
Mhm.
One of the other questions that Delegate Naraki had was referencing to liability. Can you touch upon that if you don't mind, Danielle?
Yeah, so most organizations already have liability insurance if they're operating as a shelter. So to some extent, that would cover any concerns that might arise from that. But in general, if there's an overdose, the shelter doesn't have liability under state law. There isn't anything that requires them to be held accountable for that. So just to answer that particular question about overdose that came up, but our assessment is that there's no increased liability to shelters on the basis of not screening out based on alcohol or drug content in the blood system.
Thank you, Danielle. I appreciate you being here
Yeah,
at
happy to.
this late time as well. Any other questions on HB 93? And again, ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to have this discussion so we can digest this information for voting next week. All right. Seeing no other questions, Ben, let us now go to HB 222. This is CSST, the piping systems. And this bill, again, is for discussion as well. And Ben, if you could pull that up and kind of go through it, I'd appreciate that as well.
Great. Okay, thanks, Chair Holmes. So we have so the title of the bill is Fuel Gas Piping Systems.
Want to
And
pull the bill up there, Ben?
sure, yep,
Thank you.
you got it.
And just kind of scroll through the bill as you talk, if you don't mind.
Of course. Okay. So here's the bill as amended. The subcommittee should have received a copy of this. The title of the bill is Fuel Gas Piping Systems and Corrugated Stainless Steel Tubing, also known as CSST, Prohibitions and Study. Looking at the bill, we have the first provision, and so just before we get started, I guess it's cross-filed with Senate Bill 175. The general scope of this bill, we heard some at the hearing. There was concerns about the piping that is used to supply fuel for your non-movable appliances like your water heaters or stoves that are used both in commercial and in residential applications. In 2022, the General Assembly passed the Flynn and Laird Act to expressly prohibit the use of corrugated stainless steel tubing. That's this provision here that you see now, which Chair Holmes was a sponsor of. So that's kind of some background to what on the bill that's before the subcommittee now. But what this is doing, so we have the Flynn and Laird Act for the public safety provision here. The bill, as amended, is striking that, okay? So it's returning it to existing law. It's like nothing happened. There were no amendments, okay? So we're striking all of the added language from the bill and returning Section 12206 of the public safety article to the way it was. However, they are adding a penalty, okay, and what this provision in more detail is about is using, it says there in subsection B, non-arc resistant jacketed corrugated stainless steel tubing, which again is like fuel delivery piping in homes and in commercial spaces. This non-arc resistant jacketed corrugated stainless steel tubing may not be used in new construction of a customer-owned natural gas or liquefied propane piping system in a building. They cannot use it in a renovated property if the renovations, this is existing law, affects more than 50% of the square footage of the property, or if it's requiring the addition of a new gas line to a gas piping system. So the only thing it does on this provision for the existing law, again, is add that penalty provision there in subsection C. Now, the next probably logical place to turn to in the bill would be the business regulation section. We just looked at 12206 and how this is about using these materials. Now, the problem is that the basis for this section and the business regulation article is that was just for the use. This is a person may not sell, offer for sale, transfer, or distribute. And then it's using the same terminology that we looked at in the existing law, non-arc resistant jacketed corrugated stainless steel tubing, and then period. Okay, there's the period at the bottom. And so there was a lot of feedback and testimony about the standards, the terminology, what coulombs are. And so what the bill is amended is doing is it's just prohibiting non-arc resistant jacketed corrugated stainless steel tubing, again, using that same term that we've already had in practice for the use in the construction applications there. Those are the two statutory provisions of the bill. On these points, there was some feedback. Let me see here. I think some of the opponents of the bill would characterize what 19108 is doing as being ineffective. The concern was that yellow jacketed CSST, which we heard about causing house fires and the death of firefighters, will still be for sale with this language. That's what my understanding, the characterization of the opponents' general language was. I think they also added, and I think they're here too as well, Chair Holmes, but they were also saying that it should be adjusted to say that may not sell, offer for sale, transfer, or distribute non-arc resistant jacketed CSST that does not meet the ANSI LC1 standard, which I think the committee has heard a little bit about at the hearing, and since a lot of the testimony, a lot of the unfavorable testimony. I talked to the advocates for the bill about this. And one thing, they were saying that they're concerned about adding specific standard language because it would be a deviation from the existing public safety language that has been in effect. And to my knowledge, or to Chair Holmes's knowledge, I don't think that there's been any issues with how that's been used. So it seems like adding the ANSI LC1 standard at the end could be a more narrow qualification when we have just this language. So those are the first two parts about what's going on with the bill. And then there's also a study. Okay. There's a study, it's being conducted by the Office of the State Fire Marshal. That's who the advocate and the sponsor have been working with and have an understanding about addressing this issue through the study. They've mentioned that, so the study is generally going to be conducting and making recommendations for fire hazards associated with commonly used fuel gas piping systems. And that term, fuel gas piping systems, includes gas piping and CSST in residential and commercial buildings. They're looking at a number of things like comparing fire hazards with different types of piping systems. They're looking at things like the likelihood of them causing a fire during a lightning strike, effectiveness and standards, best practices for state and local legislative, regulatory, and building code standards, legislative or regulatory changes, industry standards or requirements that are necessary to prevent or minimize fire hazards, as opposed to just what's going on in the code, but also like the industry, which I know like the ICC and all those other industry standards. And then that's being done in consultation with the State Fire Prevention Commission, the Department of Labor, and the local government entities that do gas fitting inspections. There was like a quick fiscal comment. It's not a formal analysis, but it may cost money for a person to conduct the study. So that's one thing to consider. The study report is September 1, 2026. So that is a year out. And the fiscal analyst mentioned that would help reduce this cost. They were saying that it will likely be less expensive. The bill is amended to the capital budget. That the capital budget expense should be nullified because this LC 1027 standard is being struck. And that was going to, if it hadn't been struck, it was going to be a problem for state of Maryland and local government because they would have had to get more expensive piping. There is still an impact for small businesses that have existing CSS non-arc resistant CSST as it relates to this provision here. So that's a consideration. The one thing for the subcommittee to think about is the effective dates for this. The effective date initially in the bill and the provisions that the two statutory provisions I looked at was, let me see here, it was October 1, 2027, which is a delayed effective date. And that was helping to reduce that impact on small businesses. But you have to also just remember that that was done because of the higher standard that was in effect. I mean, one like theory or possibility though is that because we're just keeping it as the non-arc resistant jacketed CSST, that is, you know, a much reduced standard from the LC 1027, the coulombs, all that. So that's another like counter to, I guess, the fiscal note, which I think is still you know, processing the changes when I was speaking to the fiscal analysts before the subcommittee meeting. Let's see, I think, yeah, I think that's pretty much it, James.
And the biggest things here, because we heard continuously about the LC 1027 standard, which was going to cause a monopoly for a certain industry. And the other thing that was causing some concern was the 36 coulombs in terms of the electrical strike as a test for the piping systems, which has also been eliminated. Let me go to Delegate Boyce first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question about the reason. So I see the Office of the State Fire Marshal should conduct the study and make recommendations, and I'm wondering why it's not, for instance, the Department of Labor.
Well, I'm not sure why it's not listed that way. Is there any discussion that you've had been with the with the persons in the bill to distinguish why it wasn't?
And I just want to clarify before Ben answers is that I think they should be a part of carrying it out along with the state fire prevention commissions and the state, but it just seems like the Department of Labor maybe should be conducting this and potentially working with the Office of the State Fire Marshal versus the State Fire Marshal.
Is there a reason why you wanted the Department of Labor in here, Delegate Boyce?
I mean, they're more of the state agency. I mean, I don't know.
Okay.
Just a curiosity, but why it's not.
Okay. Ben?
Okay, yeah, thank you, Chair Holmes. That was something that was considered and looked at through the process of with the advocates and the sponsor of the bill to get the type of study that they want. So I know that the expertise issue is, definitely, an important consideration to make sure that the study is getting the right information. I'm not an exact expert on, I know for of course the DOL does a lot of the code enforcement and stuff like that.
Plumbing and yeah, so they kind of manage all those
But
those standard bodies. So I was just curious about why it's not the opposite.
I think the advocates, Chair Holm, might would be the ones that I've been working with would be Victoria Venable, Chair Holmes, if you're interested. But
That actually preferred the Department of Labor, but I'm curious about why.
All right. Well, I see Victoria is here. Victoria, you want to see if you can respond to Delegate Boyce's question in terms of the Department of Labor and
Sure, of course. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So when we were drafting the list of questions, basically that we would like to be answered by this study, as you'll notice, several of them, most of them have to do with the risk around fire. And since the fire marshal's office is the one that has been investigating these fires, we decided that it was probably better for them to take the lead on the study. And then in consulting with staff at both the Department of Labor and the fire marshal's office, we determined that they have the engineers on staff at the state fire marshal's office that could be that could help with the expertise for the items that we have listed in the study.
Would there
Yeah.
be any benefit, Victoria, in including the Department of Labor in this study at all?
So we do have them listed as a consultant for that reason. We wanted to make sure they were still involved. But we were also trying to make sure we were streamlining and mitigating any of the financial impact that could incur from the
Sure.
study.
I think any agency would have to incur some cost, but I would say that I would see that their positions to switch. So again, I'm not suggesting that the fire marshals not be a part. What I'm saying, I'm suggesting that they switch positions. And I respectfully, because this is an important issue not only to the chair and to the committee and to this subcommittee, it feels like a more neutral body to me to help manage this so that when the recommendations do come out in a year, that we have the best recommendations, objective recommendations coming forward so that we can potentially, based on what those recommendations say, act, because this is what this body wants to do. And this is the second time that we've had this legislation, and we want to do well by this issue, and most importantly, do well by these families. And so that's why I'm wondering about them being a more a neutral body in this work. So
What we'll do, Delegate Boyce, is we will reach out to the Department of Labor and seek their guidance on their involvement on this, and we will include that in our discussions for next week. That be okay? I saw another Delegate Stewart. I thought I saw another question. Oh, Delegate Naraki, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, my first one actually was to agree with Delegate Boyce. I was actually going to raise the same point there. I think it's really important that this feels like a neutral study. I'm not sure that you get that same feeling with the fire marshal's office, as they were one of the organizations pushing for the bill, frankly. So that, I'm not saying that they shouldn't have a role in this process, but I think that the Department of Labor, particularly maybe the codes administration area of the Department of Labor, then that's what they do. They create codes like this, would be an appropriate place for a study to exist. I know that we want to get an outcome that's fair to everyone here, not just one side here, but we want to get a neutral outcome. So I agree with Delegate Boyce on that. I also, with respect to the study, I think it would be important to not only include the individuals or the organizations that are named already, but I do think it's important to get feedback from the industry and also from whatever relevant code bodies there are out there. I think, again, trying to gather as much information here is better than less information.
Okay, great. And that's exactly why we're having this discussion now, so that when it comes time to us to cast a vote, we have as much information as we can to make an informed decision. We will reach out to the Department of Labor and some of the industry consultants to see how we can pull some of these things together for us all. Any additional questions on HB 222? We appreciate, ladies and gentlemen. We're now going to go to the final bill of the evening, HB 705. And Ben, if you could pull that up on the screen as you talk through it, I would appreciate it.
Thank you, Chair Holmes. 1 second. Let me pull that up. Okay. All right, so let's see. HB 705, 1 moment.
Enlarge it, Ben.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
You got it. Okay, HB 705, we have an amendment. The title of the bill is Real Property Short-Term Rentals. There is no fiscal impact. the goal is to allow of the bill. It's a pretty straightforward bill. Let's see here. They have well, the goal of the bill is to allow generally tenants to offer their rental as a short-term rental, such as Airbnb, but only when the municipality or county allows that for allows short-term rentals by the property owners. The still allows the property owner, as you can see in subsection C there, to prohibit the use of property in this way. This was inspired, this bill, I believe, in part by legislation from Virginia that was also discussed at the bill hearing. The amendment before you, what it does is provide that the governing body of a county or municipality can enact a law, a local law or ordinance prohibiting an operator from operating more than one property in the county or municipality as a short-term rental if the operator is a lessee or sublessee. So that's kind of, I think there was that phrase rental arbitrage that was brought up at the bill hearing. That's to adjust that. That's also done to bring it in closer to conformity with the Virginia law, I believe. But the substance of the bill really is in B1 about how the governing body of a county or municipality cannot enact a local law or ordinance that prohibits the operator from having a short-term rental because they're a lessee or sublessee. I checked with CAI, who was initially unfavorable. They advised that they are good. The MML and MACO, I asked them about the bill as amended. Their position was that the amendment helps, but they would remain opposed because of preemption. And MACO also said that as well. It's still a preemption bill, so their legislative committee would be unlikely to support the bill. So yes.
And this is totally enabling. Is that correct, Ben?
Well, I would no, I'm not sure, Chair Holmes. I think it's really B1 here is probably the thrust of the bill about how the county or municipality cannot enact a local law or ordinance that's
Oh,
provided.
gotcha. Okay, yeah. Okay. All right. Let me go to Delegate Stewart and then Delegate Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I like this bill. I like the amendment. I just have one sort of small suggestion, which is just to clean up the definition of what an operator is to make it clear that people can't subvert the Virginia-based amendment by creating multiple LLCs. So right now, there's no sort of LLC requirement or anything related to LLCs. And so I think that we can make it cleaner by just saying like an operator either has to be like a living, breathing human, or by saying that you can't use multiple LLCs as a way to sidestep the sort of one residence per jurisdiction requirement. That would be my only suggestion.
Yeah, and I kind of thought about that too because the multiple LLCs would be difficult to track, and having the definition of and there is some existing definitions of living and breathing people, but not in that kind of specific language. But I understand what you're saying. But Ben is making that note as well as I. Delegate Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have some concerns about the bill in general. I like what Delegate Stewart was saying. I'm also concerned, does this preempt a county or municipality from enacting local ordinance that prevents this for like other reasons? So what I'm thinking of is in my district and nearby my district, there are a lot of colleges and there's a lot of ordinances in Baltimore County, specifically because of Towson University, and there's rules around cohabitating adults who aren't families, stuff like that. So would Baltimore County be preempted from any sort of some sort of ordinance that prevents like a Towson student from subleasing their apartment this way or something like that?
Well, there's a couple of things in here, and Ben, you can chime in. Pull up the language, Ben. I think it says one of the pieces in here is a time frame of 30 days I think it says 30 days or less or something, as I recall.
Consecutive
Yes,
days.
yeah, it defines it less than 31 consecutive days. That would definitely make it a short-term rental.
Okay, and one, it does specifically call out the residential facility for students. Okay.
Yeah. So I think that I hope that takes care of your concern.
Partially.
Partially.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
And if you know, give us some suggestions, Doug Allen, to completely take care of your concern if you don't mind. Uh, Delegate Boyce.
Thank you. I think Delegate Allen is talking about zoning that permits, for instance, Baltimore City, you cannot have any more than 4 unrelated individuals in a house. In Baltimore County, it's actually 2. And I think he's talking about that provision. For instance,
Oh, I see. I see.
I know a lot
Okay.
of county, like Towson students, will find housing in Baltimore City because you can have up to 4 unrelated individuals in a property. In the county, it's only 2.
I see. Maybe what we can do, Ben, there is existing law relevant to number of persons in a in a unit per square footage in some rental units. So maybe we can take the rental unit statute and put that here to strengthen that portion of it. That might be helpful. I didn't even think about that. That's a really good idea, Delegate Boyce. But there is some existing language in rental unit statute that would probably take care of that, Delegate Boyce.
Thank you so much. And I also just want to clarify that this bill is essentially saying that as a renter of my apartment, I could go get another apartment and essentially create a short-term rental property or an Airbnb for the property that I initially rented out.
Yes.
Um, and I could, and I guess people do make money off of this, and that they charge potentially more than the actual rent that they're paying.
I would hope so.
I mean, this is very clever. Um, this is very clever, and I know we have a couple of other short-term rental type bills, and I'm wondering, do we need to do just one big kind of omnibus bill and include all of those different provisions? But this is fine. I think this is clever, but I think for some folks it it might give some pause to it, in that it's saying that I essentially have the right to re-rent a property that I'm renting. And it's
Yes.
different from people who sublet, right? Like I'm going to be out of the country for the summer for a summer internship. I want to keep my property, so I sublet it for the 3 months is one thing. I think the fact that this is essentially on purpose, I literally live somewhere else and I rent it out is quite interesting. I guess you would need a lot of money to be able to pull off something like this, but it's just a thought.
That's exactly what this is. And I think we had testimony of a person who lived in um, over there, right there on the water at the bridge there, who did this. But let me go to Delegate Naraki, then I'll go to Delegate Baker. Naraki, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand what the bill is trying to do in principle. I'm trying to understand, though, how this would actually be enforced in practice. I'm thinking about in Baltimore County, like I don't know how you would track how many of these properties a leasee has. So I understand what it's trying to do in principle, but I just don't understand how you would actually enforce this. When we don't have a statewide database, a rental registration database. I've discovered this in my other sort of travels here recently with a squatters bill that I have, which has posed some problems with that. So I'm just not sure how this is enforced in practice.
Yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying, particularly when the bill outlines the specific number of units that you can do this for in a county or municipality. It limits that in a municipality or a county. And I understand your concern without having a database of how many leases you have. How do you enforce that? I totally understand it.
Yes.
Yeah, I totally get it. That was something that crossed my mind as well as I was reading through it. Any additional questions, Delegate Naraki?
No, sir.
Delegate Baker, you have the floor.
Yeah, so if I'm renting out a house that I own and I specifically state no subleasing permitted. So if I don't want my property to be subleased, I still have that right.
If you look down there at paragraph number 11. Is that what that's notwithstanding section may, wait, is that it? Property owner from prohibiting limited by lesser sub. Yeah, that's right, 11 through 13.
Okay, I got it. Just
All right. You good to go, Delegate Baker?
yes, thank you.
Delegate Stewart?
Yeah, thank you. Just very briefly, Mr. Chair, just to Delegate Baker's point, counties and cities could still just outright ban short-term rentals under the bill. They just couldn't treat the renter portion differently than the homeowner portion. And similarly, landlords could still do whatever they want under the bill. It's just the counties and cities being regulated. That said, I think Delegate Naraki's point is actually really good, which is that, my concern, or, the concern about the sort of Virginia amendment with the Airbnb arbitrage and limiting this to, an LLC or a human or whatever getting one bite at the apple, that does seem frustrated by the fact that we don't have a statewide rental licensing database. I agree that I think it would be very difficult to police whether or not someone has signed up for a bunch of different things. I just don't know. And if you could track it, like, who is going to hold them accountable? I mean, is the AG really going to prioritize this? So yeah, just my 2 cents there.
And the answer is no. Delegate Baker, you're back up again. Delegate Baker?
I never left.
Oh, I'm sorry. Your hand is back up is what I mean. You're muted.
It was never down.
Oh, I'm sorry. You got a question? Oh, okay. I got you.
I understand now. You want my hand down.
Yes, sir. All righty. Any additional questions on HB 705? Let me scroll through here. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I do appreciate you spending the evening with me. And it is now 10:45, and I certainly would like to do something other than look at your lovely faces for the rest of the night. Ladies and gentlemen, I will see you tomorrow morning. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great meeting.
I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ben.